Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. The very first story, which is 45 minutes long, is a Halloween themed one, so I hope you all enjoy that. The rest of the video are horror stories that I just thought were really good and deserved to be included in the video, so I hope you enjoy those as well. If you do enjoy, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes on this one. Dropping a like helps ensure more people see the content, it helps with the algorithm, blah blah blah, but it also just lets me know I'm doing a good job, so if you feel that the video is deserving of one, I'd really appreciate it. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I do post content just like this all of the time. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no ads, right after the ad break after this intro. There won't be any more ad breaks after that one. I gotta make a little bit of money somehow. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Every year, in the weeks leading up to Halloween, my mom used to take my sister and I to the pumpkin patch at Walbach Farm. It was a popular seasonal attraction, a family-owned vegetable farm about a half-hour's drive from the suburbs where I grew up in Missouri. Many locals remember it fondly, but I recently learned that I am the reason it was shut down for good. One of the biggest attractions at Walbach Farm was the haystack maze. They had a haunted hayride and pumpkin carving and corn mazes too. Every upstanding pumpkin patch does. But only Walbach touted a pair of monumental, sprawling haystack mazes as the main event. Most haystack mazes are nothing to write home about. The walls are usually only a few feet high, so short that most kids are able to peer over the top of them. But the haystack mazes at Walbach were different. These were massive, fully enclosed structures. Skeletons made of wooden pallets and chicken wire with bales of hay stacked all around to form a series of branching tunnels on the inside. Giant straw pyramids. A bona fide feat of farmhand engineering. There were 2 mazes, a smaller one for younger kids, and a bigger, more complicated one for the teenagers. Of course I wanted to go in the bigger one, but anyone younger than 13 had to be accompanied by somebody older. My big sister clearly thought she was too grown up for the whole pumpkin patch thing, opting to sit on one of the swing sets and pick away at her Game Boy, while my mom joined me on an exhibition of the kids' maze. She held my hand as we ducked through the main entrance of the maze. The opening led straight into a central area with the first tunnel attached to it. It was much bigger than any other space inside the pyramid, with enough headroom that even an adult could stand straight up. Since the haystack maze had a roof made of wooden pallets and hay, it was pitch black inside. I was 10 at the time, and a bit of a scaredy cat, 4 years younger than my sister, and deeply afraid of the dark. As scared as I was at the darkness of the haystack maze, I was excited for the opportunity to try out my new flashlight. It was just a small, plastic piece of crap that they gave to all of the kids at my dad's company barbecue, but I was absolutely blown away by it. The flashlight was hand-powered. A small crank protruded from the back end that you had to turn to charge up the battery. This was well before smartphones came around, so it was the perfect breed of gimmicky device to boggle my early 2000s kid mind. Watch this. I flicked my flashlight on, extremely proud of how bright it was. I had spent the whole car ride there winding it up, getting as much juice in it as possible. My mom acted super impressed. I stuck to her like glue for the first few minutes. The tunnels were much smaller than the first room, meant to be navigated by crouching or crawling. Some tunnels had wooden ramps leading up to a second level. Eventually I got more comfortable and started running ahead, scoping out possible dead ends while my mom crawled behind me. Even with my mom there, it felt a little eerie. Being surrounded on all sides by thick bales of hay had a sort of noise-canceling effect. All of the footsteps around us sounded muffled, and I could clearly hear my own breathing despite being surrounded by other kids. The air was hot and stuffy and claustrophobic. The kids' maze was well occupied, but there were still some empty pockets here and there, routes that were clearly dead ends after just a few steps. I made a point to check every nook and cranny. As I peered around the corner of one of these dead ends, the beam of my flashlight met a sign that made my heart drop. A small boy sat huddled in the corner, facing away from me. His shoulders shook, and he whipped his head around as soon as I appeared. My flashlight hit his face, and I saw tears on his cheeks. He looked only a year or two younger than myself, clearly overstimulated by the whole affair. He brought his knees closer up to his chin, and silently wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Hi, honey." My mom had caught up with me. "Are you lost?" She had the sweetest voice. The boy nodded. "Is your mom with you?" He shook his head, fresh tears welling up in his eyes. I could tell he was embarrassed, and I felt bad for him. "We're lost too," I said, holding my hand out. The boy smiled, took my hand, and picked himself up off the ground. "What's your name?" my mom asked. "Henry." "Nice to meet you, Henry. Do you have a flashlight?" "It died." He held out a small Buzz Lightyear themed flashlight and flipped the switch to demonstrate how its batteries had failed him. "That's okay. Simon can share his. Right, Simon?" I nodded, jumping at any excuse to show off my favorite gadget. "You know," my mom said leadingly, "there's a secret trick we can use to find our way out of here." Henry and I leaned in. My mom stuck her right hand out to the side, touching the wall of hay next to her. "This maze isn't very big. There's only so many ways we can go. We only get lost if we lose track of what we've checked already. So if we pick one wall and keep following it no matter what, we'll find our way out." Looking back, her method was far from perfect. The stick-to-one-wall approach might work if you applied it from the very start of a maze, but because we were already inside, the wall to our right could have easily been a freestanding divider fully contained within. Doing this could have led us in circles if the maze were complex enough. Fortunately for us, the kids' maze was intentionally straightforward. With the three of us sticking to one wall, we found the exit in just a few minutes. Henry's mother was waiting for us on the other side, looking worried. She exchanged niceties with my mom, thanking her for helping Henry out. She said that he had insisted on tackling the maze without her. I felt a sting of shame knowing that this kid, who was younger than me, had proven himself more independent. Henry and I spent the rest of the day running around together. We did the corn maze, sat next to each other on a hayride, even went back through the kids' haystack maze again. I used to get picked on a lot, so it was nice to make a new friend outside of school. After making our way out of the kids' maze a third time, we decided that we were ready for something more challenging. We begged our moms to take us inside the bigger maze, but they waved away the idea, tuckered out from the day's events. "What if Zoe took us?" I asked, prompting my sister to tear her attention away from Fire Emblem for the first time all day. "Right, like I want to go running around in the dark with a couple of kids." Zoe's words cut me, though I didn't think she meant for them to come out as harshly as they did. Upon seeing my face fall, she begrudgingly agreed to join us. A freckle-faced farm boy wearing a Grim Reaper cloak over his blue jeans stood watch at the entrance of the PG-13 haystack maze. He told Zoe to stay by our sides at all times. This maze started just like the kids' maze, with a big open chamber and a single tunnel leading forward, though there was a clear sense of larger scale. Zoe plopped down on a haystack bench and flipped her Game Boy back open. Aren't you coming with us?" I stuttered. "Why did you want to do this if you're too chicken to go in yourself?" she groaned. Henry shifted uncomfortably on the balls of his feet. "I'm not chicken," I said, puffing my chest out. "Just come get me when you're done," she said. "Won't that guy know you didn't stay with us when we go back through the front?" She laughed. "Like I care about getting in trouble with some hick." And with that, I flicked my flashlight back on. Henry and I steeled ourselves and set off down the first tunnel. Right off the bat, I could tell there were way less people in the maze. Faint footsteps from above were few and far between. We only passed one other group of people after the first fork. A teenage boy eyed us down as we passed, likely guessing we weren't supposed to be there alone. Henry's company washed away a lot of the unease, but I quickly realized that we were in over our heads. It didn't take long for us to get turned around. "Maybe we should go back and try from the start," said Henry. "Nah," I said, not wanting to admit that I didn't remember the route we took. "This place isn't that big. I bet we're almost there." We passed the same group of teenagers again. It was a good indicator that we were going in circles, but we were both too timid to ask for help. I cranked the flashlight's battery a bit as we hit a dead end after dead end. It wasn't showing any signs of losing power, but the fear of losing our only light source was starting to dawn on me. "Are we supposed to go this way?" Henry's question broke my train of thought. I followed his pointer finger to the wall with the beam of my flashlight and saw a small gap in the haystacks. Some of the hallways in that maze were pretty cramped, but this was the smallest opening we had come across. So small, in fact, that I had walked right past it. To answer his question, I wasn't sure. The entrance was no bigger than 3 feet tall. Even we would have to get down on all fours to fit through it, and it didn't seem likely that the people who built this thing would expect teenagers to fit through it all. The hole was just small enough to appear unintentional, but just big enough to suggest that it was the way forward. "Can't hurt to try," I said. Henry was a head shorter than me, so he went in first. I squeezed through behind him, holding the flashlight out in front of me. The opening was deceptively deep, stretching far enough to be considered a tunnel on its own. Henry stopped in his tracks halfway through, wary of its unexpected length. "You're sure this is part of it?" Henry called over his shoulder. "Look, there's an opening right there." I pushed him forward. The small tunnel led out in the middle of a standard-sized one. As Henry came out the other side, I heard a muffled laugh and some scampering footsteps above us. Henry stumbled as he tried to get on his feet, falling back into me. I was still crawling out of the shortcut, and he fell right onto my outstretched arm holding the flashlight. Snap. My heart sank as the flashlight was sandwiched between Henry and the dirt. It didn't go out, but when he rolled off of it, I saw that the hand crank used to charge it had completely broken off. I frantically started rooting around in the hay for the handle. "Is everything okay?" Henry asked, his voice shaky. My hand found the little plastic knob. Yeah, everything's okay." I went to pop the crank back into place, only to find that it had snapped off in a way that was truly irreparable. The handle left behind a good chunk of plastic in the hole that it had been dislodged from. I tried forcing it back in, but it just plopped right back out when I went to turn it. I heard Henry's breath quicken. "It's okay," I assured him. Before now, our age difference had seemed negligible, but all of a sudden, I felt that it was my responsibility to calm his nerves. "Look, I can still turn it like this." I plugged the hole with my finger and started twisting it. There was only about 1 millimeter of open space left for my finger to latch onto, but it provided just enough leverage for me to rotate the disc like a rotary phone dial. As the mechanism whirred, jagged remnants of the plastic crank dug into my skin. I winced and withdrew my finger, but Henry seemed convinced. I helped Henry back up to his feet. "Come on, we'll be out of here in no time." I couldn't have been more wrong. After going through that opening in the hay, we walked for what felt like an hour. Occasionally we would hit a fork in the road and pick a way forward at random. We tried doubling back to the small tunnel that had led us here, but we never came across that opening again. Eventually the flashlight started to dim. It was a slow fade. By the time I realized what was happening, our visibility had been cut in half. I tried to charge it as much as I could bear to, rotating fingers until all of them were bright red and stinging. There wasn't much use to it. The mechanism ran off kinetic energy, and I could only get in a few turns at a time before the tips of my fingers would rub raw. We started calling out at any footsteps from the floor above us, but those had become even more infrequent. The slow depreciation of our flashlight went completely unspoken for what seemed like forever. Neither one of us wanted to bring it up. I only know that he saw it too, because the more it dimmed, the more our pace quickened. We were full on sprinting through the maze. At that point, we could barely see more than a foot ahead of us. I made a turn and Henry missed it, running headfirst into a wall of hay. He fell backwards onto his butt. Tears started streaming down his cheeks for the second time that day. "Simon, we're lost," he cried. I know. I could barely choke the words out. Our light was rapidly depleting, like the dying embers of a campfire. Henry screamed for his mom. I did the same. I felt sick to my stomach, but too hungry to vomit. My body was aching and out of breath, but the maze was far from done with us. I started cranking the flashlight with my finger as fast as I could. The bulb shot back to life, but I could only push past the pain for a few seconds. As soon as I took my finger out, it immediately started to dim again. The battery was too far gone, and the skin on the tip of my finger was in a nasty state. Henry was hyperventilating, clawing at a solid wall of hay and screaming like a maniac. "Henry?" He didn't even hear me over the sounds of his despair. "Henry!" I grabbed him by the shoulders, letting the flashlight fall at our feet. It illuminated us from below as I pulled him close to address him face to face while I still could. "Henry, the light is gonna go out," I finally admitted. He burst into a tirade of shrieking sobs. Snot and tears caked his face. It broke my heart seeing what little faith he had left completely drained from his eyes. A knot sat high in the back of my throat. My mind raced for the right words as his face faded from my view. What would my mom say? "It's going to be dark, and it's going to be scary," I said, doing my best to steady my voice. "I know we're lost, but we can still get out." No. "Henry, there has to be a way out, and even if we can't find it, it's only a matter of time before everyone comes looking for us." I grabbed his hand, and I stuck it to the wall right next to us. "We'll keep walking, and we'll make it to the end no matter what." The luminescent bulb's final glimmer sunk into his eyes. "Henry, will you walk with me?" His pupils disappeared into the dark. "Yes." And with that, the light was completely snuffed out. I'm realizing now that I may not have been descriptive enough earlier. When the flashlight went out, we were cast into a darkness the likes of which I've never known before or since. Every wall and ceiling was packed thick with bales of hay. Even in the middle of the day, not an inkling of sunlight was able to pierce through the layers upon layers of crisscrossing straw. If somebody held their finger an inch away from your open eye, you would have no way of knowing it was there. Compounded with the hay's soundproofing quality, we were essentially lost in a labyrinth sensory deprivation chamber. I let Henry cry out for a while. When he finally spoke again, I could hear the resolve in his voice. "Okay, let's go." I kept my hand pinned to the wall as I stood up and instructed him to do the same. After a moment to collect ourselves, we set off again. It took a long time for us to adapt to the darkness. Just putting one foot in front of the other was a challenge. Henry kept bumping into me from behind, as we were completely unable to sync up our strides. We walked slow and steady. After walking headfirst into a left turn, I took to keeping my other arm stretched out in front of me. I started calling out turns as we came across them, not wanting to overshoot and risk taking my hand off of the wall. We took lots of breaks. The feeling of pins and needles crept into our outstretched arms frequently. We didn't talk any more than we had to, outside of calling out turns. I kept my thoughts to myself. My ears rang in the sickening silence. I felt some slight comfort in hearing Henry's feet dragging behind me. though it was entirely outweighed by a dread which grew exponentially with each passing second. We just kept going and going and going. Winding paths forked into more winding paths. We circled dead end after dead end. We weaved our way through countless corners and endless entrails, walking and walking and walking still, and as we walked, things started to change. First, I felt it in my feet. The ground beneath us became firm. I thought we had made our way into some wooden boards, but when I knelt down, I still felt dirt. I still felt dirt, but the dirt felt different. It felt as if the dry soil was giving way to a more solid material, slowly rising from the earth as we advanced. The walls started to feel different too. Strands of hay began to feel sparse until the bouncy, dry texture was replaced by the smooth, cold feel of cobblestone. Even the air started to feel less stuffy. "Simon, do you feel it?" I didn't have to ask what he meant. "Yeah, let's stop for a second." I plugged my finger back into the flashlight, which I had fastened to my belt loop since it went out. I took a deep breath and started turning. Once again, the plastic bit into my finger. The hallway lit up around us. I was terrified to learn the details of our new surroundings. Somehow, as soon as we could see again, my fears were redirected in a way that I could never have predicted. As light filled the area, the feeling of hay and dirt beneath our feet returned. The walls, the ceiling, it was all hay. The stuffiness and stillness returned, as though the air around us reverted back to that of the haystack maze. Henry looked ghoulish, sweaty and covered in dirt, desperation in his eyes. I'm sure I looked just as bad. I pulled my finger out of the flashlight when it drew blood, and the light started to die once more. As the room around us disappeared from view, the feeling of the cold, stony atmosphere returned. There were no words to be said. I couldn't bring myself to believe the reality of where we were, and I couldn't fathom the possibility of where we might end up. Henry whimpered as we were cast back into unequivocal darkness. "I don't like this," Henry said. "Let's go back." "Back the way we came?" "Yeah." I racked my brain for a better idea. "Okay." We turned on our heels, swapping hands on the wall. I had no faith left in the wall method, but clinging to it was the only way for us to retain some sense of direction. I think we were doing it for comfort more than anything. Henry was now in the lead, taking us back the way we came. I expected the familiar feeling of hay beneath our feet to return as we retraced our steps, but that feeling did not come. If anything, the following hours made it even more clear that no matter which way we went, each step took us further into parts unknown. I heard the sound of our shoes against the hard stone reverberating more and more as we continued. Our steps accumulated a sizable echo, suggesting that we had ventured into some sort of wide-open space the size of a coliseum. I even felt a cold breeze. I stuck my free arm out to the right in an attempt to reach the other side of the tunnel, but it only found open air. I felt numb to the surrealism of the situation. I had abandoned all disbelief hours ago. Even if we had spent a significant amount of time walking in circles, there was no way we couldn't have stumbled across the exit by now. The texture of the wall and the feel of the room continued to evolve as we walked. The air became thick and dry once more. The stone texture beneath my fingertips began to soften, until it felt akin to some sort of crumbling, sedimentary rock. I heard the sound of crackling fire, as if large torches lined the wall above our heads. Yet they cast no light, and we felt no warmth from the invisible flames. Thunk. I grunted as I ran right into Henry, sandwiching him against a wall in front of us. It had been so long since we hit a turn. I guess we had stopped holding a hand out ahead of him. My nose smacked into the back of his head. Stars danced in my eyes. The force almost knocked my hand off the wall, but I managed to keep hold of it. Shoot. I said, rubbing my nose with my free hand. Are you okay? He didn't respond. My heart started pounding ferociously. Henry, are you there? Yes, he squeaked, his voice barely a whisper. Whatever we had just hit, it had shaken him to his core. What is it? I pleaded. I jumped as I heard a whisper directly in my ear. It was Henry's voice. I hadn't heard him inch closer. His words were barely audible, but they punched me right in the gut. I think it's a door. I stood speechless for an eternity. Are you sure? I whispered. I felt his hand grip my wrist. I instinctively ripped it away from him. Sorry. Go in front of me, he said, still keeping his voice low. I felt him squeeze underneath my armpit to get behind me. I steadied my breath, took a step forward, and stuck out my left hand. It was met with a wall of solid wood. I could feel the coarse, splintery grain as soon as my fingertips hit its surface. Hairs rose on the back of my neck. I slid my hand to the position where I would expect to find a doorknob, and I found one. The metal was warm, an unnerving juxtaposition to the cool air we had been experiencing as of late. I didn't try to turn it. In school they told us that when a door handle is warm, that means there's a fire on the other side. That was reason enough for me to not open the door, but it wasn't the only one. A foreboding sense of anticipation crept up my spine as soon as my hand felt the knob. I can't explain it, but I could tell that there was someone, or something, standing right on the other side of that door, waiting for us to open it. I took my hand off the knob. Let's turn back around, I whispered, not wanting to question or even acknowledge our horrifying discovery. Okay, Henry replied, likely feeling the same. Even now I have no idea how long we were actually in that maze for. I tried counting as high as I could to pass the time, and I stopped somewhere in the thousands. Hours felt like minutes, but seconds felt like days. Realistically, we had only been without food or water for a handful of hours, but I'm sure that the time we spent running around in a panic had expedited our hunger and dehydration. We took breaks more frequently. Blisters had formed on my heels. My knees felt like they might buckle beneath me at any moment. I began to miss the sweat on my forehead that had stung my eyes while we were in the thick air of the haystacks. I began to wonder if we would walk for days until exhaustion overtook us. I need to go to the bathroom, said Henry. His voice took me by surprise. I figured he had already gone in his pants like I had, but I guess he had been holding it the whole time. Okay, I said, slowing to a stop. I'm gonna go a couple steps ahead. Call me when you're done. I did as I said, sinking down to a crouch with my back against the wall as he did his business. As I heard the sounds of his relief, a ping of revelation struck me. I slapped my hand against the cold stone of the ground, and heard no echo ring out after. Wherever we were now, the lacking acoustics suggested that tunnel had become narrow again. I heard Henry pull up his zipper, and I walked back towards him. I think we should try to touch the other wall, I said. What? I think the tunnel is small now. We should try to get to the other wall, and see if that leads us out. He didn't have to think about it long. The path we were already on hadn't helped. Keep your hand on this one, I said, finding his shoulder again, and stretch out as far as you can. I felt him spread his arms wide, and I followed his left arm out into the middle of the hallway that I hoped we were standing in. We locked hands, and I stretched as far away from the wall as I could, begging for the tip of my middle finger to brush against another wall. But that other wall wasn't there, and in my strain to find it, I accidentally pulled Henry too far. Suddenly we were falling to the right, the opposite direction from which we had been leaning. I toppled on top of Henry in the space where the wall had been a split second ago. My palm struck the cold, hard ground, catching me just before my face would have hit it. Henry wasn't so lucky. I heard him groan as the back of his head smacked against the floor hard as granite. "Are you okay?" I screamed out. He moaned. "Did you let go of the wall?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Just for a second," he mumbled. I shot to my feet and frantically started shuffling around in the dark, waving my arms out in front of me like a zombie. I didn't feel anything. The wall was gone. Our only tie to the maze had vanished into thin air the second we let it out of our touch. Tears flowed. I screamed as loud as I could. I screamed for my mom. I screamed for God. Nobody answered. I felt Henry curl up on the ground by my feet. As my voice broke, I collapsed on top of him, molding us into a human heap of misery. We sat there in silence for quite a while. Henry, tired and completely consumed by the darkness. I have no words to describe the complete and utter hopelessness I felt. Henry laid his head on my lap. I felt his tears soak into the fabric of my jeans. I brushed a comforting hand through Henry's hair, and I felt a warm, sticky substance oozing out of the back of his head. My stomach sank through the floor. "Henry?" "Yeah," he replied, his voice broken and faint. "Are you sure you're okay?" His grip on me loosened a bit. "Yeah." I let that sit for a moment. "Do you want to keep walking?" I asked. I felt him lightly shake his head no against my lap. "You want to stay here?" He nodded. "Okay, we'll wait for them to come find us." Henry's breathing became labored. I sat and stroked his hair and closed my eyes. This is where we would die. I was sure of it. After everything that we had been through, it didn't seem that bad. We had slipped into a crack between worlds, lost in a boundless, incomprehensible void, betrayed by our reality, forgotten by our God. There was nothing left to do but sit and cry and wait. And then, out of the dark, we heard him. At first, he was just a pair of creeping footsteps in the distance. They appeared so subtly that I didn't even process them until they were almost upon us. I thought they were a trick of my imagination, but sure enough, a deep, booming voice soon rang out to accompany them. "You boys lost?" The sound of another voice was so unnatural to me. Maybe it was the hunger or the exhaustion or the pure emotional turmoil, but I swear the voice sounded exactly like my father's. "Dad?" Henry called out from my lap. A low chuckle split the air. "No, I'm not your father," the shadow man cooed. "I'm just a friend." As he inched closer, I heard that our visitor was not alone. His footsteps were joined by those of a four-legged animal. Claw tips clacking against the hard floor suggested it was some sort of large dog. Suddenly, his animalistic companion bounded towards us. I braced myself and pulled Henry close to my chest as I felt the cold, wet prodding of a large snout against our bodies. Sniffing and snorting like that of a basset hound filled the air. I could hear a large metal chain dangling from its neck, the other end no doubt held by the mysterious man. "You boys seem mighty lost," he said. On the surface, he sounded concerned, but the more he talked and the closer he got to us, I sensed a jovial undercurrent in his words, like someone trying their best to suppress a smile. "Can you get us out of here?" Henry pleaded. "Of course I can," said the man. He was now standing right in front of us. "I came here to collect you." I heard the basset hound go off towards the spot where Henry had relieved himself earlier. It sniffed around a bit before returning to us. I heard the chain settle as it sat at its master's heel. "How can you see us?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Do you have a flashlight?" "Don't need one," the man said, a slight twinge of annoyance in his voice. "I've done my fair share of rooting around in the dark. Guess my eyes have adjusted to it." I tried to visualize what he might look like. I did my best to keep the nondescript shape of a man's face in my mind as he spoke, but the dancing fuzz of my vision kept contorting his features into something unnatural. I heard a shuffling, and the proximity of the man's voice, when he next spoke, suggested that he had knelt down to address us. "You're in a rough shape," the shadow man sighed. "Please get us out of here," Henry moaned, barely audible. "Well," said the man, "I sure would like to, but I can only take one of you at a time." I couldn't believe my ears. "What do you mean?" I pressed. "Why can't you take both of us with you?" "The boy is far too hurt. Trying to manage both of you at once would just slow us down," the man said, his voice rife with false emotional strain. "Wish there was another way, but that's just how it is." "What are you talking about?" I growled. "I'll walk right behind you." "I said no," he boomed. His baritone shook my body so hard that my teeth clattered. "One child at a time, that's the rule," he growled. He sounded exasperated at the notion, as if the rule were not to his own design. My gut told me not to follow this man anywhere, but the thought of being separated from Henry petrified me. The man let out another deep sigh. "Don't you worry. As long as you stay right where you are, I'll be able to get you just fine. What do you say, son?" I was scared and confused and filled with a million questions, but far too weak to protest further. Despite my complete lack of sight, I felt the unmistakable aura of an outstretched hand in front of me. I went to meet it, and upon feeling the leathery flesh of his palm, an icy jolt of terror shot through my veins. I had been trying as hard as I could to keep the basic image of a human man's face in my mind, but in that moment, the dancing specks behind my eyes insisted on warping those features into something horrifying. I tried hard not to imagine him as a towering, slender figure with spindly arms that stretched multiple yards long, so long that he had to fold them over thrice like the crooked legs of an exotic bird, just to offer his hand to me this close in proximity. I tried not to imagine a robust pot-belly jutting out of his otherwise slender frame, covered in thick black fur, and hanging low over his legs, which were just as long as his arms, and folded up like an accordion. I tried not to imagine his face as a grunt, eyeless visage with dark, rugged skin stretched tight around an impossibly wide grin. I tried not to imagine a pair of ivory horns atop his head that spiraled several feet up towards the heavens. I tried and tried and tried to keep that ghastly depiction out of my head, but for as long as he held my hand in his, it persisted in my mind's eye, as if it were an unquestionable truth. I withdrew my hand from his grasp, awestruck with a terror that I cannot possibly describe. I pulled Henry as close as I humanly could, and I whispered directly into his ear, "Henry, I don't think we should go with him. I think we should stay here." The man definitely heard me, but he didn't react. He remained crouched in front of us, skeletal fingers held out in offer. "I want my mom," Henry whispered. He felt limp, like a rag doll in my arms. "Please, son, I reckon he ain't got much time left," taunted the shadow man. I had no tears left to cry. Henry was dying in my arms. Whatever might happen to him, should I let him go, he wouldn't last much longer here. I loosened my grip as I felt Henry's arm leave my lap. I whimpered and felt him being tugged away. "Don't worry," the man sneered. "I'll carry you." I heard the hound pull at its chain and set off into the dark. The footsteps of the man followed behind it. "You stay put," I heard him call over his shoulder. "I'll come back for you later." I curled up in a ball as the footsteps became increasingly faint. My mind raced with the possible outcomes of my decision. What awaited Henry in the arms of the Shadow Man? Did he really intend to help? Or had Henry just met a terrible fate? My thoughts were bombarded with untold horrors that might be in store. I imagined Henry's blood-curdling screams at the hands of the conniving specter. I could sense his suffering. I could hear his torment. I could feel his blood on my hands. I don't know what possessed me to finally get back on my feet. Maybe it was pure adrenaline, or my fear of the Shadow Man, but the newfound isolation was a big enough push for my survival instincts to fully kick in. I was struck with the sudden, intense realization that I had to get myself out of that maze, whatever the cost. I shot up so fast I nearly keeled over. I fumbled around for the carabiner, latched onto my belt loop, and freed my flashlight from its clasp. I took a deep breath and shoved the mangled tip of my pointer finger back into the hole. It was time for a Hail Mary. I gritted my teeth and began to spin the dial like my life depended on it. Needles of pain shot up my arm as I fed the mechanism with my suffering. Every second the plastic shards dug into my skin felt like a hot lick of hellfire, but I viciously worked it round and round until the room began to illuminate. Once again the sight of the hay walls and a dirt floor began to creep into view. But that wasn't all this time. As the light brought me out of the dark, endless void, I began to hear muffled voices and footsteps all around me for the first time in days. They were looking for me. They were looking for us. A wave of relief crashed over me, but it stole my mind from the task at hand. My cranking had slowed, and the light began to dim again. As it faded, so did the sounds of my salvation. I was slipping away back into the dark. I took off running, the promise of rescue, reinvigorating my work in the flashlight. I winced as it shredded my skin, alternating fingers until each one was coated by the steady drip of flesh blood. I cried out as much as I could, my voice raspy from overuse and dehydration. I ducked and weaved, desperate to make contact with someone, lest I fall back into the darkness. I turned a corner and finally I was met with the glow of another flashlight. I dropped to my knees, letting the bloody hunk of plastic clatter to the ground. Beams of light bounced toward me, accompanied by the worried cries of my rescuers. The next thing I remember was waking up in the arms of a stranger. Daylight scorched my retinas as a teenager carried me out of the maze. It seemed impossible for the sun to still be up, but the time spent was the farthest thing from my mind. Through a blur of tears, I saw my mother frantically screaming at a bunch of farmhands. My sister shrank behind her, face snow-white with guilt. A crowd of people was forming around them. Whoever found me hadn't been searching for long. I barely remember anything that happened once I was out of the maze. I remember being delivered into my mother's arms. I remember how tightly she held me, while I told the firefighters about everything that had happened in the maze. I remember my sister crying profusely. I remember waiting there past sunset while a team of first responders and farmers dismantled the haystack maze bale by bale. I remember Henry's mom pacing back and forth as the layers were slowly peeled away. I remember her screaming and bawling, and slamming her fists in the dirt when they removed the last haystack. And Henry was nowhere to be found. I remember all of that now, but to be honest, I don't remember anything that I've written here until just a few months ago. Back in July, a couple of Zoe's friends and I staged an intervention about her drinking. She never made it past high school, and by the time I got home from my first year of college this spring, she had a reputation around town for being a total barfly. I think her friends were worried about her getting worse when I went back in the fall, but I wasn't sure why. We'd barely spoken for years. She lashed out at me as soon as she saw the circle of chairs in her living room. She claimed that I was the reason she couldn't keep her face out of a bottle, and wept about how a little boy went missing because of her carelessness. At first I had no idea what she was talking about, but the more she spilled about everything from that day, the more those memories poured back into my head. The stone hallways, the wooden door, the man who took Henry, everything. Even as I write this, new memories from my time in the haystack float to the surface. I feel adrift in a river of recollection, grasping out at small islands of information as they pass. Whenever I manage to latch onto one and start digging, I uncover the same system of roots connecting them all below the murky depths. I don't dare ask my mom about that day, but I've done my research. No matter what actually happened in that maze, a little boy named Henry went in and never came out. The local papers all say that he was led away by a strange man who took him off the farm. Nobody saw the two of them leave. Nobody knew what the man looked like. But I know. Try as I might, I still can't shake the sight of him from my mind. I can't escape the familiar sound of his voice. When I'm left alone with my thoughts, my ears replay his parting words to me like a broken record. My fear of the dark has already followed me into adulthood, but since remembering all of this, it has amplified immensely. I haven't slept much these past few months. Even when I crash from exhaustion, I always do so with the lights on. I've avoided going anywhere after sunset, and I never let my phone battery dip. I haven't gone to the movies, or anywhere that would put me at risk of finding myself in total darkness. I'm not sure why I chose to share my story here. Maybe seeing all of the Halloween decorations going up around town stirred some guilt. I don't want any kid out there to go through what I did, and I definitely don't want anyone else to end up like Henry. Part of me thinks Henry is still out there. I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe I'll try to go back someday. Shut myself in my closet with the lights off and try to find him. For now, sharing my story is all I can stomach to do, because I know that even if Henry is somehow still alive, he won't be alone. I'll come back for you later. Out there, in the dark, I know he waits for me still. People had always told me I was pretty enough to be a model, but I knew modeling was the farthest thing from what I wanted to do. I love to keep active and engaged, which was why I was studying environmental surveying at university. The last thing I wanted to do for a career was stand around all day, striking empty poses while photographers snapped pictures of clothes I was wearing, that I didn't even like. I was the kind of girl who was always bouncing off the walls to go outside and do challenging, honest work. Modeling would not be that. But I recognized that it was a relatively easy way to earn money, and I definitely could use a little extra cash while I completed my degree. So on that day when that businessman stopped me in the mall and asked me if I would be interested in modeling, I considered it. Unlike any of the times modeling had been mentioned to me before, I listened intently and took the man's card. He explained that his department store in the mall was looking for live mannequins to model clothes in his storefront window. Come to think of it, I could remember seeing that display before when I'd visited the mall. The models had always looked so professional and composed, rarely moving or reacting to the mall goers. I also recalled that they were beautiful, and felt flattered to be considered on their level. You have just the right look to be one of our live mannequins. The clean-cut man exclaimed to me matter-of-factly, "Our clothes will look perfect on you. You'll for sure get customers' attention." "Thank you," I smiled back, flipping over the sleek business card for Forever Stunning. It did seem like the store was in need of new live models though, as occasionally they would just use a real mannequin in place of a live mannequin. Who knew such a boring job would have trouble attracting models? On the morning of my first shift, I did my hair and makeup as I'd been instructed to, nude makeup with my blonde hair worn down in loose waves. I threw on some jeans and a tank top and made my way to the mall. The storefront of Forever Stunning was as immaculate today as it usually was, with various handbags and platform shoes neatly arranged around the white display. It looked out over the rest of the mall, in full view of the main atrium. There was already one live mannequin inside, a brunette woman with straight hair, wearing a colorful wrap dress and wedge heels. Her eyes barely flitted at me as I passed, the rest of her not moving a muscle. She was a pro, I could tell. Entering the sophisticated and bright clothing store, I immediately made my way to the front counter and met the manager. the man I'd spoken to earlier. Mr. Ralden handed me hangers with the clothes I would be wearing today and pointed me in the direction of the changing rooms. Once I was dressed in a demure yet stylish ruffle blouse, pencil skirt, and strappy heels, I was finally led to the display. After making sure my phone and bag had been put away, Mr. Ralden's welcoming tone suddenly evaporated as he gave me an unexpectedly severe warning. Under no circumstances are you to make any major movements while you are modeling at the display, he told me with an unflinching coldness. Nor are you to leave your post for any reason before finishing your shift. There are severe consequences for models who do. I just nodded, taken aback by the absurd rules I'd just been given. What did he mean by consequences? This was just a crappy mall modeling gig. How would he even know if I moved? And what was he gonna do? Fire me twice? At his instruction, I stepped into position on the display and posed the way he wanted to. With both hands on my hips, my legs tilted at one side and my head facing straight forward. And then he turned and left, leaving me to my 4-hour shift. It wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, and it didn't take long for the discomfort to set in. My neck began to ache from staring straight. My hands began to feel hot from the blouse fabric. My ankles began to wobble in the tall heels. Almost as annoying were the endless people walking by in front of the display. About a third ignored the display, but a good deal looked at me. Half would just observe me but keep walking, but the rest would react to me in some obnoxious way, pointing at me, chuckling to their friends, shaking their heads in disapproval, mimicking my poses, or even catcalling me. Worse yet were the ones, usually kids, who would tap the glass or try distracting me, like I was some kind of zoo exhibit. I was sure at least an hour or two had passed, but I couldn't even check my watch to be sure. All the while, the uncomfortable fabric was starting to irritate and cut into my skin. It seemed ridiculous that I would be expected to endure hours more of this without even a break to readjust myself. "Hey, I'm just gonna take a quick break," I called out to the other model, still in pose. Before the words were fully out of my mouth, an urgent reply shot back from her. "Do not move," she implored, her mouth barely moving from what I could see of her reflection in the window. Her pose, of having one hand on her chest, one hand held out at her side, and her head tilted slightly back, was considerably more uncomfortable than mine, and yet she was refusing to budge even a little. "Just stick it out until the end of your shift. If you move, you will seriously regret it," she hissed again. And she was completely right, though I had no idea at the time. Some people take modeling jobs way too seriously, I thought to myself instead. "Yeah, sorry, but screw that," I replied, imperiously. I finally broke my pose and stretched my limbs, readjusted my garments, and scratched any itches. It felt so good, and I couldn't believe I'd deprived myself of it for an hour over some silly rules. Retaking my position, I noticed that several passerby had witnessed my little character break from being a live mannequin. Hope that didn't ruin the magic too much for them, I thought sarcastically. I could sense the disapproval coming from my fellow model, but I didn't care. My discomfort fixed, I vowed to remain still for the rest of my shift. My shift continued on and more people in the mall continued walking past the display. I noted with relief that dealing with their reactions had become easier. In fact, it felt like they were hardly reacting to me at all anymore. While shoppers were still pointing out and ogling my fellow live mannequin, with me they would look at my clothes or not look at me at all. It was an odd change, but I guessed a welcome one too. Another hour had rolled by when there was a break in the monotony. My best friends from school were walking past the window, and my excitement swelled to see familiar faces. I was sure they'd find it a right gag that I was working here, and provide some amused reactions. But as they approached the window, they looked right through me. They pointed at and reacted to the brunette model. But when their eyes landed on me, It was like they didn't even register me as a friend or a human. As they passed the display, I leapt off it, running back into the store in panic. "Whatever you do, don't go into the mall. Finish your shift," echoed the other model's voice as I changed back into my own clothes and ran through the store. But I wasn't going to listen to her. All those empty looks from people were weighing on me. I needed someone to see me as a person, to register my humanity. Exiting the store into the mall, at long last I noticed people looking at me, paying me attention, but that attention was the worst possible thing I could have received. "What is that?" a woman screamed, dropping her shopping bags in fright. "It's a walking mannequin," screamed another, shielding her children from seeing me. Looking at my hands in confusion, I at last saw what they saw: shiny, white plastic, like those of a mannequin, where skin should have been. My reflection in the mall fountain yielded the same: a featureless mannequin face in place of my attractive features. Posing stationary for the last hour, I had looked like a mannequin, and while running around the mall in confusion, I looked like an uncanny mannequin monster. "Call security. A mannequin has come alive." At once, people began to circle around me from a distance, some pulling out phones to snap pictures, and others blinking as if they couldn't believe their eyes. By now, I'd wandered far from the storefront. In the background, the sound of a mall security cart rang out. I knew I had only seconds to get away. I raced past the crowd, them leaping back in horror as if I was lunging at them. This brought me enough time to make it into the door of the mall maintenance corridor. Pulling out my employee pass, I quickly unlocked the door, threw myself behind, and shut it. Not waiting to see if anyone was following me inside, I took off running down the corridor. I caught glimpses of my stiff-looking mannequin limbs and digits flapping around me, and hastened my desperation. I already knew what my only hope was. The brunette model had been right. I needed to finish my shift. This horrific mannequin curse had descended on me because I had broken the rules, and I needed to follow them to have any chance of lifting it. Bracing myself, I stepped from the safety of the tunnel through the back entrance to Forever Stunning. I found myself standing behind a shelf on the other side of the store from the display window. I had to get back there. Careful not to run into any patrons of the store, I began creeping in my mannequin form through the aisles of the clothing store. If even one saw me, the alarm would raise all over again and I would be done for. Passing the changing room, I waited patiently for an empty stall before darting in and changing back into my display outfit. Finally, it was time for the home stretch. Throwing caution to the wind, I threw a large shawl over myself to conceal any sights of hardened plastic flesh, and strode past the counter, in full view of shoppers. I'd just have to pray that no one saw me, or made a fuss if they did. Back at my post, I tossed the shawl in a clothing bin and jumped back into position, hands on hips, legs tilted and head forward, and this time I held my position like my life depended on it, much like an actual mannequin. I didn't move a muscle. I was on pins and needles waiting for that moment when someone in the mall would recognize me as the walking mannequin monstrosity from before. Indeed, some people did look like they recognized me, but they walked on by, probably dismissing what they saw before as a mistake, hallucination, or prank. "Your shift is up," came the words I'd never thought I'd hear. Mr. Ralden was back to tap me on the shoulder and hand me my clothes. I still couldn't bring myself to believe that my nightmare was over, until a shopper came up to me. "Excuse me, miss, do you know what aisle sweaters are?" she asked, staring me in the eye. And that's how I knew the curse was broken, and I was back to looking like a human being again, and not a mannequin. Of course, the curse wasn't fully broken. On some level, I think I knew that. I had broken the job rules, moved when I wasn't supposed to, and missed a portion of my shift. To this day, whenever I move too fast, or too animatedly for too long, I'll get glimpses of that plastic skin on myself. So will others around me, and they'll utter those familiar shrieks of fear of a walking mannequin. It only lasts a second or so, and then they see me as a human self again. Regardless, as a result, I'm not as energetic and active as I used to be. I try to be still whenever I can, when I'm out in the field working or socializing with others, so the curse doesn't kick in. I quit live modeling the day after my first shift, but I still find myself following that golden rule. Do not move. It's dark and raining outside. I'm typing all this inside a car, hoping that nobody will notice me, praying that this is a safe hiding spot at least for this moment, at least until I let everything that happened off my chest. I need at least one other person to know before it's too late. To give you some background, I'm a second-year med school student at possibly my country's oldest university, definitely one of the oldest universities in Asia. I won't give any names to protect the innocent, but it goes without saying that my campus is haunted. Forget the prestige or the fact that literal national heroes studied in this university. Mention its name to anyone in the country, and they'll ask if you've ever seen a ghost. I prided myself as a woman of science. I've had countless night classes and 8 p.m. dismissals, even in pre-med. I never saw a ghost. Not once. What I did see, however, is something worse. Something no one should ever see or have to go through. It shouldn't have to exist, period. Even if an evil few disagree and say that it's for the greater good. So I went on with my life, made friends and had a few boyfriends, loved some teachers and hated a few, and dreamed of becoming a successful orthopedic doctor in the near future. Although my parents wanted me to take pediatrics or obstetrics instead. Med school was a ton of pressure and highly competitive, with fewer and fewer students returning each term. But what was new? Except for that one night when we all entered the lecture hall to find an unfamiliar professor waiting for us on the platform. I'll never forget the look on his face, unnaturally pale and pasty, a smile as wide and forced as a clown's. Mr. Romero is undergoing investigation by the university's authorities. He explained between his teeth, still smiling. In the meantime, I'll handle this class. My friends and I glanced at each other, a little unnerved, but at this point we just wanted to get it over with and return to our dorms. In particular, I was so exhausted that I didn't get to recite much that day. I was also pretty bummed because I liked Mr. Romero and his way of teaching, even if he had a tendency to question the university's archaic religious policies, or its current stances on politics, or the ongoing corruption within the admin. In lectures, Mr. Romero had the tendency to go off topic. Whenever he caught himself, he always said the same thing. Everything is connected. Then he'd go back to his lecture on nerves and tissues. Still, as upset as some of us were from the substitute arrangement, we weren't really surprised about it. We just hoped that Mr. Romero wouldn't get fired. Other professors who asked too much ended up getting called by the admin. A few students were victims of this as well, and they'd never show up to class or lab again, presumably expelled. And so for the longest time, I thought I wouldn't see Mr. Romero again. Until tonight. My friends and I were on our way back to the dorms after class when I realized I had left my canvas bag under the desk at the lecture hall. "You can get it tomorrow, Rafaela," my dorm mate's Olive said. "Besides, it's been raining hard lately. You don't want to get caught in the rain." I considered for a moment. It was typhoon season after all. We had just passed by the main building of our campus, which was just a road away from the med building. A little lore on this building. It's really old. It has gargoyles and statues carved on the roofs and walls, and for some reason, no one knows why, its top floor is sealed off to the public. No classes are held there. All stairs leading to that floor are blocked off. Even the elevators don't have a 4 button to prevent people from going there, just floors 1 to 3. We're not yet far off, I told my friends. I'll catch up. You guys go ahead. Thunder rumbled and brought with it fine droplets of rain. I groaned. I really wanted to get my canvas bag because my umbrella was in there, and I didn't want to waste my money on another umbrella that would get lost, forgotten, or stolen again in the future. Also, it was almost 9, and the janitors would be cleaning the lecture halls anytime soon. I'll follow you, Nathan said. Olive smiled knowingly, and the others began teasing him. Even though I knew Nathan had a crush on me, I saw him as nothing more than a friend. I hurried to the med school building before he could follow, and before the rain worsened. By the time I found my canvas bag, the building was almost empty, and the lights of other classrooms in the hallway were going off one by one. The last classes were getting dismissed. The rain outside worsened as well, all of a sudden, sending torrents of downpour that I knew would flood the lower-lying levels of the campus. I groaned, realizing that I had chosen the worst pair of black flats to navigate that possible situation. But it had been sunny in the morning. Never mind, I thought to myself, settling on my seat in the lecture hall. It was so eerie to be alone, but I didn't believe in ghosts, and I knew that it would be much worse outside. Maybe I could use a bit of rest. I yawned and folded my arms on the table and slept, setting my alarm to 20 minutes. I didn't know then that I was being watched, that there were footsteps from the hallway, and that the whispers I soon heard came from people who had just entered the room. For all I knew, these were just part of a dream. Then the alarm sounded and I woke up to a dark room that smelled like rotten meat. Or worse. I've handled cadavers in med school. I thought I was used to smell of death. But this wasn't just death. It smelled like something or someone was actively dying, decaying, and in the darkness all around me were cries and moans of pain. I scrambled to my feet. I tried to stay calm. I knew that I was no longer in the lecture room. For some reason, I was still holding my phone. I turned on my flashlight and saw myself in a dark hallway. One wall was made up of windows half hidden by thick railing. I peered outside and had to blink twice. I wondered if I was still dreaming. The windows overlooked 4 stories below, to a courtyard garden, that of the main building. Then I heard rattling, 3 knocks coming from a door. A rescue. Deep voices, including the substitutes. If it works, at the very least, some part of her will be here. Another voice, a female, someone I couldn't recognize. And if it doesn't, then she'll end up like Romero. Footsteps and flashlights, lines of light that fell upon walls and revealed horrors that almost made me scream out loud. But that would give me away. I hid behind an empty bookshelf, hoping to blend in the shadows as the 2 teachers inspected the room, but not before I captured evidence against them. Shielding me from view on the other side was a torso. Yes, a torso. The rest of the body blended in the wall. As the flashlights danced around the hallway, I caught more body parts. An arm jutting out of the floor, a hand swaying in painful, jerking motions, legs and feet with missing toes and embedded between walls and the floor. Shapes of faces under the paint, their expressions filled with agony. Still with my phone in hand, I hid behind the half-bodies and other obstacles. A chair here and there, other bookshelves, some nearly broken tables, and followed closely behind as the 2 paced the room. Trust me, I caught everything on video. The body parts still jerking and moving, attached to the ceiling, walls, floor, the sounds of eternal torture, people forever stuck between life and death, and then snippets of answers. My substitute professor and his colleague were apparently using the bodies of subversives, and patients who had no family to miss them as test subjects for experiments on teleportation. But I can't tell if this new arm over here is hers. It's her skin tone. Something tells me it's not her. If it's not her, we've succeeded at least. I stayed long enough until I saw what I needed to see. I used the flash in my cell phone camera, knowing fully well that I was finally blowing my cover, but that was Mr. Romero's head sticking out of the wall, offering me a small, sad smile, and a word of advice that I was going to take regardless. Run. I dashed down the hallway. The professors, more familiar with the terrain, sprinted after me. Or tried to. Some of the arms yanked their feet, and they had to struggle to break free. The man broke free first, but tripped over another leg, while another half-body jutting from the nearby wall reached out to pull his hair until he fell backwards. Meanwhile, I was getting closer and closer to the door, wondering how on earth I was getting out of the building, if every entry point to the 4th floor was sealed off. Turns out I didn't have to worry. I opened the door, and in the blink of an eye, I was at the lobby of my dorm. Nobody else was there. It was late, but the lights were still on, and in a moment, the security guard came out and greeted me with a smile. "It's quite late, Rafaela, but you're dry, thank God. I'm glad you didn't get caught in the rain." Thunder rumbled outside. The wind and rain howled. I ran up to my room, charged my phone, and checked if everything was there. Nothing but 10 minutes of blank, mute nothingness. And the pictures I took of Mr. Romero? One long black rectangle that didn't show anything even when I changed its brightness in an app. I knew I couldn't go back to school. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them in a second, I found myself in my car, which was in the parking lot across the hospital. Their experiment on teleportation worked for the very first time. It seemed, with me. I am slowly learning to navigate this power. All I had to do was close my mind and will myself to be in a different place. I must admit that it was an amazing power to have. Something I could also use in bringing the truth to light. But at what cost? At what cost? I needed a job as I could barely afford rent. I just walked out of a bar job mid-shift a few days before. My landlord mentioned a new place that was hiring. He was a strange guy, to say the least, but he seemed sincere. "So you can get me something that starts straight away?" I asked. "Yeah, they'll take you on pretty quick. They're always getting new people. You know how to drive a forklift, though, right, kid?" He said. I didn't, but I was desperate. I thought, how hard can it be? "Yeah, I can drive one. Is this a warehouse job then? Is it nearby?" I asked. "Yeah, it's not too far from us. I'll give them a call and let them know they got some fresh meat." He waddled off, and I went back into my apartment. Well, that was easy, I said out loud. I was pretty happy. I just got a job. I decided to celebrate and ask my friends if they wanted to go out to the bars tonight. The next day, my landlord knocked on my door at 5 a.m. I had only gotten home a couple hours prior. I opened the door in my underwear. "Yeah, what's up?" I muttered, my mouth still dehydrated. Dry as desert sand. "You start today, kid. Get dressed and head down there. Here's the address." I wrote it on a piece of paper. He commanded in a deadly serious tone. Before I had a chance to speak, he handed me the note and stormed off. He had scribbled the address on a torn piece of a dirty magazine. Didn't surprise me at all. I got dressed and grabbed a bus to the nearest stop to the address he gave me. It was in a shady part of town. A really, really shady part of town. I'd actually avoided going this way my entire time living here. First time for everything, I suppose. I came to the address, and it was a warehouse. It looked old and abandoned. I banged on the door and, to my surprise, it swiftly opened. A tall, dark, handsome man in a designer's suit stood before me. Charlie, isn't it? Your friend has told us you can fill in the forklift position. You're right on time, too. Come on in, son," the man said. Yeah, that's me. I followed him inside and saw the warehouse. It was awfully clean. Too clean. I could practically see my reflection in the floor. I could see multiple cleaners scrubbing various areas of the small warehouse. They were wearing full hazmat-looking suits. It looked like something out of Chernobyl. He guided me to the forklift and stared at me. "Here you go," he said in a joyful manner. Do I need to, sign any paperwork or anything? Don't I need a high-vis or something too?" I said with a shaky voice. I was terrible at faking anything. "Nope, we trust you. You're all good to go," he said with a big grin. This forklift. It's kinda different to what I'm used to. Is there a manual or something?" I said with a tremor in my voice. There was no way I could pull this off. "Different? This is a standard model. I wonder what you're used to then." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I was so embarrassed and actually kinda scared too. Before I could spew any more BS, he grabbed a worker walking by. "Dean, show Charlie here how to use the forklifts. He's not used to this model." The man, my new boss now, walked off in a hurry. Dean, my new co-worker, spent the next 30 minutes showing me how to use the forklift. He could tell I'd never touched one in my life, but didn't seem to care. Dean was an odd-looking guy. Straightforward and nice enough, but definitely a dark horse. His face was covered in scars. They looked like cat scratches. He was missing an ear, and an eye, but didn't bother wearing an eye patch. His head was shaven, and he had a long red beard that hadn't seen a wash or trim in years. I was surprised how easily I took to the job. They had a few positions: drivers who unloaded the trucks, drivers who put away the containers, drivers who then took containers to the trucks that were leaving, and drivers who loaded the trucks that were leaving. To start me off, they put me on taking the containers from the unloaded trucks and putting the containers away. The containers were about 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide, like a really small elevator. They were a thick iron, not like regular wooden crates. They had an opening door on them which looked heavily padlocked. As I was moving the containers in the forklift, well, just about doing so without crashing, I could hear rumbling and thudding inside the containers. Whatever was in there was moving. I saw the man from earlier walking around and waved at him to get his attention. He walked over and said, "How's it going, son?" "It's good, thanks. What the heck is in these containers? I'm worried I'm gonna drop them if whatever's in there keeps rocking about. I hope I'm not breaking anything," I said to him. "Part of your paperless verbal contract is to respect our client's confidentiality. We don't open the containers. Each and every container has a unique barcode. We simply receive shipment, store the containers for a short amount of time, and ship them back out," he said in a stern yet friendly tone. "Oh, okay. Alright then. About my contract, how much does this job pay? And what are my hours?" I asked nervously. "Your hours are 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. You will also be paid 333 euros a day at the end of each shift, in cash," he said with that same grin. "Oh, okay, thanks. I'll get back to work now," I said to him. 333 euros a day? That's so much money. I'm gonna be rich doing this job. What a weird amount, though. And cash. Who pays in cash? 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. is going to be brutal, though, I thought to myself. I had stopped paying attention to the container on my forklift, and as I tried to move it up higher to fit on the stack, my finger slipped and I pressed the wrong button by mistake. The prongs of the forklift shuddered and the container came crashing down. As part of the container burst open, I heard a quick, excruciating scream, and then nothing. The scream came from inside the container. The entire team stopped what they were doing and rushed over. The cleaners immediately began spraying and cleaning up the container like flies swarming a corpse. As I looked around, panicking like crazy, I looked back to the container. There was blood pooling by the now busted container door. A security guard grabbed me by the throat and pulled me out of the forklift. He shoved me to the ground and put a knee on my head, holding me down in place. The tall man in the designer suit rushed over to me and told the security guard everything was alright for now. "It's okay, son. Accidents happen. It's only your first day. How about we take a lunch break while the team sorts out this little accident? What the hell is in there? I screamed. The rest of the warehouse looked at me like I'd just pulled out a grenade. Now, what did I say about that, Charlie? He said to me in a calm yet concerned tone. I thought it was just weapons or something in there. That was blood. Why is there blood in there? Are those animals in there? I cried. He didn't answer my questions. The security guard picked me up by my feet and escorted me to a break room. The room was small. It had a few chairs around a table in the middle of the room. There were some children's toys in the corner of the room. They looked out of place. I guess the boss brings his kid to work sometimes. We had a long talk. Well, I didn't really say anything. He told me how lucky I am to have this opportunity, and that they're doing a good thing here. He preached about company values and client satisfaction. He said to me that he actually appreciated how interested I am in the work, and that there may be another position within the organization I can fulfill. He said that actually, since my little accident, a slot's just been opened for a brand new, exciting opportunity. I'm in the break room now. He's gone, but says he'll be back soon and show me what the inside of the container's like, to put my mind at ease. I guess this new job isn't so bad after all. My landlord, Mr. Graves, is a great guy for getting me this job. I'll let you know how I get on. It all started last Monday. I received a call from his basketball coach. My son Riley had been acting more strangely than usual. He said my son had seemed to intentionally pop 2 basketballs alone in the locker room. I made my son play for the church league after school, even though I knew he would much rather play on his computer or phone. It wasn't like him to get in trouble. When I got to the school gym, the coach told me the basketballs were old and worn, but Riley refused to explain how they popped. I went to talk to my son, and it didn't seem to register right away that I was talking to him. He was glued to his phone screen, rocking back and forth, humming to himself. The 3rd time I yelled his name, he finally looked up at me and smiled. I asked him how he popped the basketballs. He shrugged, and I heard him hum that creepy tune for the first time. I told him to get up. Maybe he was hiding something sharp. At this point, although I was a little weirded out, I grew up with 2 older brothers and knew how much boys liked to poke and prod things and blow them up. I told Riley's coach that we would pay for the 2 balls, and it would come out of Riley's own piggy bank. When I scolded him to apologize, Riley let out the longest "sorry" I've ever heard him say, with a sly smile. When we got home, I told him to march up to his room and pull out the $50 I figured the 2 balls would be to replace. He nodded, and as he climbed up the stairs, I heard him humming that same creepy tune. When he got back down the stairs, I asked him what he was humming. He looked at me with genuine confusion. He told me he hadn't been humming anything. I still regret not pushing for an answer then, but I rolled my eyes and let him stomp back upstairs. Riley spent the rest of the night in his room. I honestly forget what I was watching down in the living room, but when I finally called it a night at 11, I remember knocking on Riley's door, telling him it's time for bed. Although I can't be certain, looking back at everything that has happened, I swear I could hear that same creepy, childlike tune. The tune reminded me of some of those tunes from SpongeBob when I was a kid. Like, remember that episode with the sea bear? When SpongeBob is describing what not to do to Squidward, the background tune is what Riley was humming. I just looked it up. It's called House of Horror from SpongeBob, but Riley's tune was not quite that. Riley's was more high-pitched, more drawn out, unsettling, and it seemed to just get worse as the week went on. I don't remember ever seeing Riley watch any of the old SpongeBob seasons, but it's always possible he watched them at his dad's house on the weekends. Tuesday was a late day for me at work. Linda, one of Riley's friends, Will's mom, picked him up every Tuesday so Riley and Will could hang out for 2 hours, while I rushed back to our neighborhood after work. When I got to Linda's house, Linda pulled me aside to the living room. She told me Riley had spent the entire time in the bathroom. After an hour, Will had come to grab her because he was getting mad that Riley wouldn't come out. I brought my tone to a whisper, wondering if maybe Riley might have had an accident and didn't want Will to see it. Linda seemed to nod in agreement, but told me that Will had said that Riley was watching it on his phone and wouldn't share. I felt the color drain from my face. Again, Riley was 12 years old, but the idea of him doing that in someone else's house was appalling. I began to apologize, but Linda called Will over, who was watching something on his phone on the living room couch. Linda asked Will about it. "It's nothing, just, Will paused. "Is it—" I cleared my throat out of sheer embarrassment. Linda stared me down like I was about to cross some unspoken boundary. She grabbed at my arm, a silent but clear command to stop. "Willie, honey, is it a—" Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. "Naughty video?" Will crinkled his nose. "Ew, no, gross, Mom." I let out a sigh of relief. "What is it then, honey?" Linda pushed further. Will seemed to hesitate. He looked back at me and Linda and took a glance up to second-story balcony. His mouth fell open as the three of us followed Riley's descent from the second story. Will got up and seemed to hide behind his mom, farthest away from Riley. Riley smiled, waved at Will, and walked out the front door. Linda looked at me, puzzled, although I was equally confused. I gave a half-honest smile, apologized, and hustled out of their house. When I got outside, Riley was already sitting on the passenger seat, looking straight ahead. I must have accidentally left the car unlocked. I tried my best to get an answer out of Riley. Each question about it, or the bathroom, or even trying to return to the basketball incident from yesterday, resulted in a sarcastic chuckle or indifferent snort. When we pulled into the house, my exhaustion at an all-time high, I felt Riley's eyes face me, and for a brief moment, I felt my son's humanity return. "Sorry, Mom," he mumbled before he slowly rocked his head back and forth, humming the tune from yesterday. Riley grabbed his backpack and left me alone in the car. I pondered calling Riley's dad, but I would rather not hear a lecture from Kyle, Riley's dad, who already disapproved of my parenting style. I instead found my older brother Ian's name on my contact list and told him about the 2-day events. Ian let me finish and ran before he told me it sounded like Riley was going through a weird moment in his puberty, and it's probably best to just leave him alone. As I started to push back a little bit, I felt my brother's voice get more assertive than usual, telling me it's best to just leave it alone. Ian hung up on me, something completely out of the ordinary for him. I sat in a huff for a minute before resolving to go about my day. I grabbed my work bag and walked into the house. Riley sat on the couch staring down at his phone. While I walked in, he seemed to quickly do something on it. "What are you watching?" I inquired, grabbing for his phone before he could answer. He looked up at me. "Nothing. My phone is dead." His speaking style was too polished, too short. This wasn't my Riley. I snatched his phone from his hands and tried to press the power button. Sure enough, the phone lit up with no battery signal. I handed Riley his phone back in defeat. He got up and started for the stairs. Sure enough, he started humming again, drawn out, ominous. "Stop!" I cried out. "Riley, please stop humming whatever that is. I don't like it." Riley stopped. He slowly turned towards me and seemed to just blink in place. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something and quickly closed it. He did this 3 more times before he took his first confident step backwards. His mouth was now ajar as his eyes still seemed to study me as if I were prey. He took another step back, and then another. He watched me, stepping backwards upstairs until he got to the top. He slammed his door shut. I climbed the steps, retreated to my own room, and on the way, waited in front of Riley's door for any out-of-the-ordinary sounds, but heard complete silence instead. I collapsed at the foot of the bed, head in my hands, begging, no praying, for an answer to his weirdness. I tried to think of my own family history. I know my grandpa had dementia before he died, but there weren't any clear examples of mental illness in my family. I decided then and there that I would call Kyle, Riley's dad. If his creepy antics kept up the next day, it would be good to warn him too, as he would take Riley for the weekend anyway, that Friday. Wednesday morning school drop-off was a silent affair. "Have a good day, sweetie." I smiled at him, eager for any affirmation as we pulled up to the entrance. Riley grabbed his backpack from the back seat, took a deep breath, and left me without a word. I watched him march up to the school, his head perfectly straight. His posture would make a drill sergeant blush. That Wednesday afternoon, I saw the school's caller ID pop up on my phone. I tried to center myself, expecting the worst. "Hello? Hello, I am Mrs. Rhonda. Is this Riley's mother?" Yes, it is." I felt my voice falter. Riley had done something. I could feel it. Is he okay?" Mrs. Rhonda paused. "He's okay. He's here in the office." I cursed under my breath. Riley's antics had already caused me embarrassment with his basketball coach and friend's mom. My mind was racing through the possibilities of suspensions or even worse. Mrs. Rhonda continued. "Has your son been acting up recently?" Could it be worse than I imagined? A fight? Destruction of school property? I swallowed my pride. "Yes, Mrs. Rhonda, he's been acting up. Different since Monday." "I see. Well, there was an incident during recess today. Your son and a group of 10, maybe 12 boys took over the girls' bathroom, if you will." "What?" I had already started quarreling my purse and mouthed to my boss. I had to go. As I reached my car, Mrs. Rhonda continued. "They seemed to hiss at incoming girls. Your son Riley was making a game of washing the boys' feet." "What?" As I swerved out of the parking lot, her words, however confusing they were, raced in my mind. "Some of the boys," Mrs. Rhonda waited. "Some of the boys screamed as he did it." The shudder ran down my spine. My mind went blank. A swerve. Barely avoided the SUV. "Are you okay?" Mrs. Rhonda inquired. "I'm fine," I choked out. "I'll be there soon." With that, I hung up. When I got to the school, Mrs. Rhonda was wiping away tears. I saw Riley swaying back and forth through the office window, some of his friends sitting motionless around him. I spotted Will, 2 boys down, as Mrs. Rhonda buzzed me in. I went to apologize, but Mrs. Rhonda interrupted me before I could start. "Have you told Riley about my son James before?" I looked at Mrs. Rhonda with confusion. "Your son?" "Yes," she said between sniffles, her voice dropping in a breathless whisper. "The one who..." She held back a flood of tears. The one who died." I instinctively pulled back in shock. "Riley asked me." Mrs. Rhonda blew her nose, pushing away a tear. "Riley asked me if we still had the blue Subaru that James was driving." I felt my breath stop and start. The lights seemed to get brighter and dimmer all at once. I felt my chest start to hurt, and it became increasingly impossible to gather a breath. James was driving the blue Subaru when he went off the road 10 years ago. Mrs. Rhonda examined me closely, seemingly trying to sniff out some knowledge of the incident I hadn't revealed. "Riley told me that James would want us to drive it still. The little bits of James would remind us of him." The room began to spin. I looked over at the bench that held Riley. He looked over at me and grinned, still rocking back and forth. I didn't recognize my child for the first time in my life. I tried my best to apologize to Mrs. Rhonda before I went to grab Riley. As we left, I leaned in and whispered to Mrs. Rhonda that Riley would be out for the rest of the week. When we got to the car, I told Riley to sit in the back seat. I couldn't be near him at the moment. As we drove, I kept catching Riley staring me down in the rearview mirror, smiling and snickering to himself. As we came up to a spotlight near our house, and he could see me staring back at him, Riley opened up his mouth, unnaturally long, and his humming emanated from the black hole of his mouth. When we got back to the house, Riley threw his bag down on the floor and locked himself in the downstairs bathroom before I could stop him. I heard him turn on the water, but I didn't hear him turn it off. I could hear him humming his tune, even over the water, no matter where I was in the house. It seemed to be just a few feet away. I retreated to the front lawn, climbing back into the car and pressing my ex-husband's contact on my phone. When he finally picked up on the fourth ring, I was hopeless in stopping the stream of tears. Kyle seemed annoyed as I began to recount the basketball story, giving snide remarks or downplaying the terror of it all. As I went deeper, Kyle fell silent. "I just don't know what's happening to him," I said between sobs. I'm scared for him. I could barely compute this feeling at the time, but it's only becoming more real the stronger this terror has dragged on. "I'm scared of him." I waited for his response. 10 seconds melted into 30 seconds when Kyle finally said something. "This all has a valid explanation. It's got..." "What are you talking about?" My words poured out before I could stop them. "Did you tell him about Mrs. Rhonda and James? I didn't even know about that." Kyle paused again. "I might have. I must have." Kyle tried to reassure me. Might have come up when I talked to him about drunk driving. I felt my breath begin to quicken again. "It's messed up to bring it up, but boys like to bring up the taboo." Kyle continued. "You really think it is not some adult videos?" I considered his theory. "Will, Riley's friend, told me and his mom it wasn't," I reiterated. "Of course he would say it wasn't," Kyle sarcastically snorted. "Look, he probably just found some article on that James kid and wanted to freak people out." "But the humming, Kyle, the feet thing, it's not natural. Something's really wrong with him. Maybe he, My words stumbled over one another. Voice dropped an octave as I hesitated at my next thought. "Maybe we look into therapy options or an exorcism," I whispered. Kyle took a long breath. "He's not going to therapy, and you're joking about that religious crap. Look, I'm stuck here in Yuma for another day, but first thing Friday morning, I'll come grab him. Might just need a change of scenery, and if he's not right when I drop him off Sunday, we can look into other options." I nodded to myself. "Okay, I'm going to watch him tomorrow, Kyle. Maybe he'll be okay just around me." We ended our call. My hand found the door handle, but my trembling fingers refused to push it further. After a few minutes of silence, I finally exited my car and tiptoed up to the front door. As I reached for my keys, the front door slowly swung open, and I could hear the slight hum from inside the house. "Riley?" I called out, taking a tender step forward into the house. I looked up the stairs, expecting to see his figure loitering over me, but found the space empty. I heard his devilish humming again. It surrounded me still. I couldn't place the sound. "Riley!" I yelled out, circling the first level. "Riley, come out now. I'm not playing." My voice fluttered in the air. My head felt fuzzy. My sinuses pushed against my eyes. Well, I could hear the blood rushing in my arms. The humming got louder as I neared the living room. "Riley, you're starting to scare me," I cried out of desperation. My voice, a shadow of its past self, died within the confines of the living room, not daring to venture further. I collapsed in despair onto the couch. I felt a tear begin to well up in my right eye. I tried to push it away with my left pointer finger. Chalky, white smeared just below my eye. A fingertip taste. Salt. I ever so slightly made out the sounds of snickering to the left of the couch. I hesitated for a half second before I slid my body to the side of the kitchen and peeked down. Riley was on his knees, seeming to laugh to himself, guarding his mouth with his hand. He looked up at me, his eyes seeming to stare right through me. He returned his gaze to the floor and restarted his snickering. The snickering was unnatural, forced, devoid of joy. My hand reached out and grabbed his back. Riley immediately went quiet. He looked over at my hand, and I felt his eyes follow my arm up to my torso before staring back at me with so much disdain you would have thought I had just spit on him. "Riley?" I mumbled out. His face went neutral. He blinked twice before rotating his head back into his skull, around the back of his neck. I looked up at the ceiling, desperate to see something, anything to explain what was going on with my son. My whole body jolted when that same demonic humming radiated out from Riley. My hands found the sides of my head. Right hand migrating south to clasp the rosary I had started to keep in my pocket. It was gone, misplaced or worse. I mustered the last of my strength. "Riley, go to your room," I shouted out, desperately trying to reclaim control of the house. Riley rose to his feet and looked down at me. I felt my lip tremble as I rose to my feet. Riley and I were the same height, but in that moment, I felt like a mouse. Riley's face slowly contorted into a smile. I could hear his lips cracking and his face twitching into place. He walked towards the staircase and silently started climbing to the top. I followed closely behind. Halfway up the steps, Riley stopped before breaking into a dead sprint for the last 6 steps, throwing open his door. I was startled but tried my best to follow close behind. When I got to his open door, Riley was perched in a perfect 90-degree angle staring straight ahead. His gaze was locked on his closed closet door, and as he began to hum his creepy tune again, my body felt limp, like my energy had been sucked out. I took a timid step back from his door, his humming still ringing in my ears. Something was calling out to me, but I still don't understand. I had to be near his bedroom, near my son, near the humming. I plopped down on the floor next to his doorframe. It was only 6. The hallway still basked in light from outside. By 9 the sun had faded, and it was dark. My only companion was the non-stop humming. The sun soon emerged. I looked down at my phone. The time had already bled into 9 a.m. on Thursday when I tucked my head back into Riley's room. He sat completely rigid, eyes still trained directly in front of him, humming that same wicked tune. The early morning soon ate into the afternoon. I sat motionless, transfixed on Riley's humming, waiting for a hint of normality, a twinge of difference, just a taste of the humanity my son was now missing. Nothing, just the humming, an elixir of evil and turmoil. The daylight soon slid into darkness, and my hum-induced trance was broken by a sudden thud at the front door. My legs trembled and felt weak as I got off the floor. The hallway around me covered in a slight gaze. I had to blink away. I took cautious steps down the stairs, opening up the front door to see Kyle standing before me, wearing a yellow vest. "I've been calling all day. Are you okay?" Kyle asked, his voice a mix of anger and genuine concern. I looked down at my phone, realizing now that I had somehow missed 16 phone calls from Kyle. Kyle seemed to study me more thoroughly. I felt his eyes glaze over the eye bag that must have been present, and him trying desperately to find life in the husk of a former wife who stood before him. "I should have called for a wellness check. What's wrong?" I nodded my head back and forth. The sunlight burned my eyes. "Riley." My mind went blank. "What about him? Is he still acting funny?" Kyle asked, placing his hand on the doorframe before flashing a smile behind me. Riley." I turned to look back to see Riley with his head down. Riley pushed against me, holding his usual weekend bag. "Riley, everything okay?" Kyle asked. Riley stopped in front of his dad. His eyes started at his feet before slowly trickling up his torso, then his head. Riley stood there motionless, just staring at his father. Kyle looked at me with shock at first, then quickly shifted into something dripping with terror. Riley then started a low hum before he kept walking towards the truck and climbed into Kyle's Ford F-150. "What's wrong with him?" Kyle asked with gritted teeth. His face was ghostly white. I looked at him with sincerity. I felt my hand try to find his shoulder, but missed badly, nearly falling forward until Kyle caught me. "Are you okay?" Kyle's concern was no longer shrouded in his usual nihilist disdain towards me. For the first time since our divorce, I felt like Kyle truly cared about me. I felt the words, "No, I'm not fine. Something is wrong with me," trying to bubble up my throat, but my eyes found Riley in the truck passenger seat, and my head slowly shook yes. Kyle placed me back on my feet. "If things get more weird, I'll let you know." I could see his arms trembling. He looked over his shoulder at Riley in his truck. "Honey, I will call you if things get worse. Riley's not okay. We'll call the therapist, the police, whatever. Are you sure you're okay?" As if I were a marionette puppet, I felt my head slowly nod yes. His truck pulled out of the driveway. Riley's eyes followed me as the two disappeared from view. All at once I felt my legs start to buckle. The world started spinning as I inched my way back into the house. I took a few feeble steps towards the stairs when everything went black. I had passed out on Friday morning. My senses returned to me on Saturday afternoon. The last 2 days of no sleep had come crashing down all at once, putting me in an impossible 24-hour coma. As I peeled myself off the wooden floor, left cheek wet with my own saliva, it took only half a second to remember. I hadn't eaten or drunk in 3 days. I sprinted to the kitchen, bouncing off a living room wall on the way, and almost went headfirst into the refrigerator. After throwing leftover chicken into the microwave and drinking approximately a gallon's worth of sink water, I tried to plan out my next move. My son was unwell. That was clear, and any further denial would do him or me no good. I reached for my phone. Will was the only boy I recognized in the office with Riley that day. Had he looked okay? Honestly, I was so transfixed on Riley and what Mrs. Rhonda told me, I hadn't noticed. I dialed for Linda, Will's mom. It rang twice before abruptly hanging up. I dialed for her again, the same unfortunate result. I started to pace, my fingernails finding the inside of my teeth. A third time, no answer. I hit the message icon instead. "Linda, are you and Will okay?" Green text. I looked down in confusion. I dialed her again. Immediate voicemail. "Linda, please pick up. I'm worried about you and Will." My mind was soon racing with theories. Will, had he done something to Linda? Does that mean that Riley would do something too? I dialed Kyle immediately. Come on, pick up, Kyle. Pick up, Kyle," I muttered to myself. Nothing. Again, nothing. I clicked the message button, hoping for a better result than Linda. The 3 dots notifying me that Kyle was typing disappeared on the left side of my screen. I let my finger hover over the keyboard, anxiously awaiting Kyle's response. The dots lingered, lost in mid-sentence before disappearing. Never mind. I started to message. "Kyle, are you and Riley okay? I've been out for a day. I'm scared." My phone buzzed to life. Linda was calling. I gathered my breath before hitting answer. "Hello?" All I heard was screaming. I yanked the phone away from my ear. The blood-curdling scream erupted from the phone speaker. "Linda?" I screamed into the phone, already dissolving into a broken mound of tears, terror, and confusion. Linda, are you okay? She was cut off mid-scream. Linda? I was wrestling with my composure. Then I heard the familiar hum. I let the phone fall from my ear. The same humming Riley has been repeating all week echoed out of the phone. This wasn't real. It can't be. The humming grew louder and louder. End call. The call was gone, but the humming still surrounded me. I found Kyle's name again in my phone and ran to the front door. Kyle lived about 20 minutes away. I'd call the police on the way, and we would solve this now. I grabbed from my keys and I stumbled out the door when I saw it. A phone was buzzing on the front mat with my name on the screen. My trembling hand reached down to grab the phone. The gleaming picture of an 8-year-old Riley and Kyle at a baseball game confirmed the worst. The phone was Kyle's. The humming grew louder. I twisted around and ran up the stairs, reaching my bedroom and locking the door behind me. That's where I am now. I've tried to call 911 6 times, but each time, all it responds with is that same creepy humming. Does anyone know what I can do? I don't have a weapon, and the humming seems to be right up against the door now. I can make out a little mouth in the door gap by the floor, a gap torturing me with that same spine-chilling humming. The tongue that comes out of it, it's long, too long for a human. I think it's Riley, and I don't think he's here to comfort his mother. I signed the offer at 2 a.m., laptop teetering on the counter, ramen steam blurring the screen. My apartment was a shrine to junk and half-finished projects. But I had a job now, a tech startup in Silicon Valley promising a product that would change how people sleep. I believed it. I wanted to believe it. They called it the Rest Band, the REM Enhancement and Sleep Tracking, REST, Rest Band. The concept was pretty straightforward, a soft and lightweight headband that you could wear comfortably during sleep, designed to improve sleep quality using gentle neural stimulation and light vibrations. It tracked brain waves and even manipulated them, enhancing your sleep by using gamma wave entrainment. To explain it simply, tiny sensors delivered light, non-invasive pulses that stimulated the brain and synced with the sleeper's natural cycle. Those pulses would entrain the brain to maintain or increase gamma activity, promoting better sleep. It felt genius. We were writing code that would touch strangers' brains while they slept. I went to work every day believing that I was making a difference. People who suffered from insomnia would feel well rested. Waking up groggy would be over. People would go about their mornings without having brain fog. I was excited to be working on something meaningful. On top of this, we had an added perk. Everyone worked at the company had a prototype of the Rest Band they would use. After all, we had to have real data points to continue to develop and innovate. Then some random night I was at home on my laptop, working on the latest API to integrate into the new hardware, when I felt a tinge of curiosity. Restband's backend was notorious for being off limits to most employees. Hell, everything important was cordoned off. Cloud servers, encrypted drives, corporate partitions. We heard the phrase, security first, over and over again. But since I was working on the latest API, I was granted with root access. I was itching to poke around. I just wanted to take a tiny peek. Nerds do that on the regular, right? Most of what I saw was pretty useless. Log files, error reports, half-developed code packages with cute little developer nicknames like sheep_counter and sweet_dreams. It was like I was rummaging through a closet of junk. I knew I wasn't supposed to be in there. My credentials only allowed me access so I could test the API. But as the night wore on, I found my way further into the system. I kept telling myself that what I was doing was harmless. I wasn't stealing anything, breaking anything, or changing anything. I wanted to see how it all worked. I was pretty disappointed that I hadn't come across anything noteworthy. But then I started seeing folders with tags like restricted internal use only. No obvious functions or purpose, just locked doors with vague names. I should have logged off, but every coder or computer geek knows that itch. Locked door? Open it. It took me a while, but I wrote a custom script that tricked the server into believing that I had read/write access to the files. I was finally into the gold mines of how Restband worked. But it wasn't a gold mine. I had opened a vault that was sealed off for a reason. The folder opened. There were files everywhere. Graphs, reports, PDFs, a flood of data that meant nothing. Then I hovered my cursor on something that stuck out to me. AG_009 REC-07-10. A description flag popped up underneath it. Leverage potential, high. Pressure rating, 8.77. What does that mean? Leverage potential, pressure rating. That didn't have anything to do with sleep, and surely not with health or wellness. My hand was quivering on top of my mouse, sweat dripping onto the plastic. Against my better judgment, I clicked. It took a moment, and a window opened up and began playing a video. It was choppy and the quality wasn't great, but good enough to see what was going on and hear audio. I saw a dimly lit room on my screen, with a soft warm light coming from the corner. A woman stood in the doorway, her hands running through a man's hair, their mouths suddenly pressed together, with fierce and intense passion, like a storm erupting out of nowhere. I was frozen in my desk chair. This wasn't a scene from a movie or TV show. The way she clawed at his back, the hitch in her breathing, the lustful determination from the man. It was intimate in a way beyond acting. A moment between lovers that wasn't meant to be seen. I could see the glint of her wedding band under the light, and I was able to see her face. My stomach turned over. It was one of my coworkers. A teammate, in fact. It was the woman who had given me a tour on my first day of work. The same woman who laughed at my bad jokes, and worked so hard to make me feel welcome. I fell backward in my chair with a jolt of disbelief. I felt nauseous. This wasn't just anyone, it was someone I worked with. My chest was tight and I felt a heaviness in my body. How the hell had this video made its way onto a company server? Were they surveilling her? Why would they want to have this? I closed the viewer and started scrolling further for answers. It seemed like hours, and I finally found a folder that seemed important. I opened it up and saw rows of files. One in particular seemed to stand out. executive_insight_report_022.pdf. I swallowed hard and began reading. The first paragraph hit me like a wave of suffocating panic, pressing the air from my lungs. Restband devices are capable of accessing episodic memory fragments during REM sleep, using unique proprietary neural reconstruction algorithms. These fragments are able to be reformatted into full, third-person, viewable sequences. Viewable sequences? Of people's memories? My mind was swirling in all directions as I read each line. Restband could take every detail, every secret, every moment, and reconstruct it into a video that could be watched. Then it hit me. I had been wearing my prototype for weeks. I backed out of the PDF and started scrolling. There it was, a string of files all starting with the same letters. SF, my initials. I clicked on the first file, SF_001, REC-06-28. The viewer opened and video began to play. I recognized it instantly. I was standing in a parking lot, Rain pouring down in sheets. In the corner of the video there was text. Estimated timestamp, April 11th, 2021, 2 a.m. The angle of the video was elevated, like it had been filmed by a ghost hovering in midair. I already knew what was going to happen, but I watched it anyway. I was shoving someone into the backseat of my car. My arms flailed up and down in a frenzy, and my breath spilled out in pale clouds that twisted and vanished into the cold night air. The person beneath me, a young man, was struggling. He was a blur, a movement, and I could hear desperation in his cries. The quality of the video was slightly distorted, but it was clearly me in the foreground, clear enough for anyone who saw it to believe it. I remembered that night differently. It was a fight, an argument I didn't want, chaos that I hadn't asked for, the kind of thing you eventually convince yourself was just a bad moment, and here it was on a screen playing in front of me. I felt sick. Then I heard the words I already knew. You tell anyone, and I mean anyone, about this, and I'll ruin your life. My stomach was in knots. Nobody knew about this. But there it was, recorded and cataloged on screen with a description in the corner. Leverage potential, very high. Pressure rating, 9.82. I understood now. I understood everything. Restband wasn't promoting health and wellness, or helping you get a restorative night's sleep. It was reaching into the dark corners of your mind and pulling out what you buried and handing it back to someone else like a loaded gun. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. File after file, each one more damning than the last. Dozens of reconstructions from employees and investors using the prototypes, whispered confessions behind closed doors, unreported crimes, affairs no one knew about. Each clip was precise, invasive, and devastating. Private moments, indulgences, betrayals, all meticulously catalogued, waiting to be used. This was a weapon. I knew I had to do something. I had to stop this thing from doing more damage than it had already done. Sure, I did something I wasn't proud of, but everyone has skeletons in their closets. People make mistakes. You learn from them. You shouldn't be punished for them. Even though that was a terrible moment in my life, I had made amends, in my own way. My dream of working in Silicon Valley had become a real-life nightmare, and I knew I had to use my skills to do something. I realized the simple truth of what I had seen. This existed, and it was made to be used. It was created to destroy lives. My plan wasn't clever. It was really just panic dressed up into lines of codes. But I had to be surgical. I had to break this thing before it became a weapon that could be unleashed on the masses, or at least slow it down. So I started. I made a patch, a blunt instrument masquerading as a maintenance script, changing the logic of the operating system, rebalancing perimeters, rewriting system indices. On the outside, harmless. Inside, designed for one thing, setting back years of research and development. What really mattered is how and where I would deploy it. So I waited, until now. Tonight there is a routine update that our ops team rolls out every month, a scheduled refresh and firmware update to the existing architecture that runs Restband. Now I won't pretend like I'm being a hero. If you think they aren't prepared for something like this, you're wrong. I'm not saving the world, I'm simply buying time. But I am smart, and maybe that is their true blind spot. They keep recruiting good people, the kind you shouldn't try to exploit. I don't know how well this will work. I may succeed, I may fail. Hell, I might end up in a shallow grave somewhere in California before this is all over with. But let this be the warning, they never wanted to come out. If someday you ever see Restband or anything like it on the shelf, if you ever think about buying one for a better night's sleep, don't. It promises sweet dreams, but harvests real-life nightmares.